The grand palace of the Zirin Empire stood tall under the twin moons, its golden spires shining like a beacon in the night. Inside the throne room, nobles and dignitaries from across the galaxy had gathered, dressed in fine silks and battle-forged armor. They whispered among themselves, their eyes flickering toward the royal family. At the center of attention sat Princess Valera, daughter of the mighty Emperor Zarkos. But unlike other royal heirs, she did not stand tall or proud. Instead, she sat quietly, her long crimson hair covering part of her face, hiding the truth that everyone already knew: she was crippled. Years ago, Valera had been a warrior, trained like all Zirin nobility. But after a tragic accident during a combat drill, she had lost the use of her legs. Since then, her people had called her a broken heir, a disgrace to the throne. Zirin traditions valued strength above all, and to them, she was no longer fit to rule. Now she was nothing more than a problem to be solved. Tonight's gathering was supposed to be a grand announcement. The Emperor had summoned noble warriors from across the empire, hoping one of them would take Valera as a mate, securing a political alliance and silencing the rumors of her weakness. But no one had stepped forward. One by one, the noblemen had given their excuses. Some said they were already engaged. Others claimed they had duties to their own houses. But the truth was obvious. No warrior wanted a crippled princess. The Emperor's expression remained cold, but his sharp golden eyes burned with disappointment. Valera knew that her failure shamed him. She lowered her gaze, trying to ignore the pity and disgust in the eyes of the court. Then a voice spoke, deep, strong, and unfamiliar. "I will take her." The throne room fell into stunned silence. Valera turned her head in disbelief, and her eyes met a human. He stood tall among the alien nobles, his features sharp but his expression calm. Unlike the others, he wore no ceremonial armor, no house insignia. He was an outsider, but there was no fear in his gaze. His stance was relaxed, yet confident, like a warrior who had seen battle and had nothing left to prove. His name was Daniel Carter, a human ambassador who had arrived in the Zirin Empire only a few days ago. The Emperor's fingers tightened on the armrest of his throne. "You dare to claim my daughter, human?" Daniel did not flinch. "I do." His voice was steady. "You wish for a warrior to stand beside her. I am a warrior." Laughter erupted in the hall. One of the Zirin nobles, a broad-shouldered alien with deep scars across his arms, sneered. "You? A warrior? What battles have your kind fought that could compare to ours?" Daniel met his gaze without hesitation. "Wars that wiped out enemies far stronger than us. Battles where humans stood against impossible odds and won." He took a step forward, his voice carrying across the hall. "I have heard your people speak of strength, of worth. Yet here you all are, too afraid to stand beside a woman who has more courage than any of you." The laughter died. The nobles shifted, uncomfortable. Valera's fingers tightened against her gown. No one had ever spoken for her like this. No one had defended her right to be more than just a burden. The Emperor's gaze darkened. "You are bold, human. But why would you do this? What do you gain?" Daniel's expression softened. He turned to Valera, meeting her eyes directly. Unlike the others, his gaze did not hold pity or judgment, only understanding. "Because strength is not just about the body," he said, "and I think your daughter is stronger than any of you realize." Valera felt something stir deep inside her, a warmth she had not felt in years. For the first time in a long time, she wondered, was it possible she was not as broken as they all believed? The Emperor did not answer right away. The tension in the room was heavy, filled with uncertainty. Then his expression hardened. "If you wish to claim my daughter, human, then you must prove yourself." Daniel nodded. "Name the test. I will face it." A cruel smile formed on the Emperor's lips. "Very well. You will face the trials of Zirin." Gasps filled the room. Even Valera's breath caught. The trials of Zirin were legendary, challenges that tested warriors to their limits. Many failed. Some never returned. Daniel did not waver. Valera looked at him, her heart pounding. Why? Why would this human risk everything for her? He had no reason to. And yet, as she studied his steady gaze, she realized he did not see her as a burden. For the first time in years, someone saw her as a person, and that terrified her more than anything else. The throne room was filled with whispers. The trials of Zirin were not meant for outsiders. They were brutal, designed to test the greatest warriors of the Empire. Even strong Zirin fighters struggled to survive them. Yet this human, Daniel Carter, had not hesitated. He had accepted the challenge without fear. Valera sat frozen in her seat, her crimson hair falling over her shoulders. Her golden eyes studied Daniel. She did not understand why he was doing this. No one had ever fought for her before. No one had ever believed she was worth it. The Emperor stood from his throne, his sharp gaze fixed on Daniel. The trials will begin at dawn. If you survive, you will have the right to claim my daughter. But if you fail, his voice darkened, you will not leave this world alive. Daniel gave a small nod. Understood. The tension in the room was thick. No one believed he had a chance. The nobles scoffed, already seeing him as a dead man. But Valera felt something strange stir in her heart, a small ember of hope, something she had not felt in years. The next morning, the twin sons of Zirin cast a golden light over the grand arena. The stadium was massive, built from dark stone, its walls lined with carvings of past champions. Thousands of spectators filled the seats, eager to witness the human's failure. Valera sat in the royal box, watching as Daniel walked onto the battlefield. He wore simple combat gear, nothing fancy, just armor light enough to let him move freely. Unlike the Zirin warriors, who relied on raw strength, humans were known for speed and strategy. The announcer's voice echoed across the arena. The human warrior will now face the first trial, the beast of Gorak. A massive gate rumbled open, and the ground shook. A monstrous creature stepped forward. A Gorak, a beast native to Zirin's wildlands. It stood 12 feet tall, its muscular body covered in thick, armored scales. Its eyes glowed red, its 4 massive arms ending in razor-sharp claws. It let out a deafening roar that sent fear through the crowd. Valera's hands tightened into fists. Even trained Zirin warriors had fallen to this beast. How could a human, a species smaller and weaker than Zirin, survive this? The Emperor leaned forward, his golden eyes unreadable. Let's see what your human is made of, daughter. The Gorak charged, its massive arms swinging. Daniel dodged in an instant. The crowd gasped. He was fast, far faster than any Zirin warrior they had seen. Instead of trying to block the attack, he sidestepped, rolling across the sand. The beast snarled, turning with surprising speed, but Daniel was already on the move. Valera watched closely. Unlike Zirin warriors, who relied on brute strength, Daniel was using precision. Every movement was calculated. He was not trying to fight the beast head-on. He was studying it. The Gorak swung again, but Daniel ducked under its attack. He moved effortlessly, as if he already knew where the next strike would land. Then he struck back. Using his smaller size to his advantage, he rolled under the beast's legs and slashed across its knee joint with a hidden blade. The Gorak roared in pain, stumbling. The crowd gasped. Valera's heart pounded. He's actually hurting it. The beast lashed out, but Daniel was already gone. He kept moving, dodging, striking, forcing the monster to chase him. The more it moved, the more it bled from precise cuts. The Gorak was strong, but Daniel was smarter. Then, in one final move, he waited for the beast to lunge, then suddenly rolled aside at the last moment. The creature's own momentum sent it crashing into the arena wall. The impact cracked its skull. It let out one final, weak growl before collapsing. Silence. Then, the entire arena erupted in shock. Daniel had won. Valera stared, unable to believe what she had just witnessed. A human had defeated one of the deadliest creatures of Zirin, and he had done it without brute strength, only skill, intelligence, and strategy. The Emperor's expression darkened. Interesting. But the trials were far from over. The announcer's voice rang out again. The human has passed the first trial. But the second will not be so easy. Another set of gates opened, and from the darkness, 3 armored Zirin warriors stepped out. Valira's breath caught. These were not just any warriors. They were elite gladiators, trained since birth, each of them carrying a long plasma blade. One fight had been difficult enough. Now Daniel had to face 3 killers at once. And this time, they would not hold back. The crowd was still in shock from the first trial. A human had defeated the Gorak, something even trained Zirin warriors had struggled to do. But now, the real challenge began. Valira's hands clenched tightly in her lap. She wanted to believe Daniel had a chance, but this was different. The 3 Zirin gladiators who entered the arena were not beasts driven by instinct. They were killers trained in the art of war. Each warrior was at least 7 feet tall, their bodies covered in dark combat armor. They moved with calm confidence, gripping their plasma blades, which glowed in the bright sunlight. The announcer's voice echoed across the arena. For the second trial, the human will face the Emperor's chosen warriors, undefeated in battle. The crowd cheered, eager to see the human fail. Daniel wiped the sweat from his brow, his muscles still tense from his fight with the Gorak. He wasn't given any time to rest, which was exactly the point of these trials. Valira's heart pounded. Her father was testing not only Daniel's skill, but also his endurance. The first warrior, a massive Zirin with burning red eyes, pointed his blade at Daniel. "You fought well against the beast, human. But this is different. We are not mindless creatures." The second warrior smirked. "You should surrender. We might let you live." Daniel exhaled slowly. Surrender? No, that wasn't an option. "Then let's get this over with." He raised his knife, the same simple blade he had used to take down the Gorak. Compared to the glowing plasma swords of his enemies, it looked laughable. The first warrior lunged. Daniel barely dodged the attack, rolling to the side as the plasma blade sliced through the air, missing him by inches. The second warrior was already charging, his weapon swinging in a deadly arc. Daniel moved again, ducking low. He knew one thing for sure: he could not block those weapons. His best chance was to stay out of reach. The third warrior, the fastest of the 3, suddenly appeared behind him. Valira gasped. He's surrounded. Daniel barely reacted in time, twisting his body as the plasma blade sliced across his arm. Pain burned through him, but he kept moving. He couldn't afford to stop. The crowd roared, seeing the human finally bleed. The Emperor watched in silence, his golden eyes studying Daniel's movements. Daniel knew he was in trouble. These warriors were not like the Gorak. They fought together, coordinated, using their numbers against him. If he stayed defensive, he would lose. He needed a new strategy. He sprinted toward the first warrior, the largest and slowest of the 3. The warrior expected Daniel to dodge, so he swung his plasma blade wide to cut off his escape. But Daniel didn't dodge. Instead, he slid under the warrior's legs, moving too fast for him to react. As he passed beneath, Daniel slashed his knife across the back of the warrior's knee. The blade sank deep into flesh, cutting through tendons. The Zirin warrior roared in pain, stumbling forward. The crowd gasped. Before the wounded warrior could recover, Daniel grabbed his fallen plasma sword and spun around. The second warrior was already attacking, his blade coming down toward Daniel's head. Slash! Sparks flew as Daniel blocked the attack with his stolen sword. The sheer force of the impact sent a painful jolt through his arms, but he held firm. Valira's breath caught. He stole their weapon. The second warrior snarled and swung again, but this time, Daniel wasn't just dodging, he was fighting back. The battle shifted. Now that Daniel had a plasma sword, He was on equal ground. He fought with speed, using his smaller size to move faster than the Zirin warriors. The second warrior tried to overpower him, swinging wildly, but Daniel stayed just out of reach. And then, when the warrior overextended, slash! Daniel's blade cut through his armor, slicing across his ribs. The warrior staggered, gripping his side in shock. The crowd erupted in disbelief. Valera rose to her feet, her heart racing. He had injured 2 of them. Only 1 warrior remained. The third warrior, the fastest and most skilled of the group, charged forward, his plasma blade flashing. Daniel barely raised his weapon in time, their swords clashing in a blur of movement. Unlike the others, this warrior wasn't reckless. He fought with precise, controlled strikes, trying to wear Daniel down. Daniel's breaths came faster. His body was exhausted. He couldn't last much longer. The Zirin warrior sensed this and pressed his attack, forcing Daniel back step by step. Then Daniel did something unexpected. Instead of blocking the next strike, he dropped his plasma sword. The warrior's eyes widened in confusion. For a split second, he hesitated. That was all Daniel needed. He lunged forward, using his bare hands, and grabbed the warrior's wrist, twisting it with all his strength. The Zirin warrior grunted in pain, his plasma blade falling from his grip. And in that moment, Daniel grabbed the falling sword and drove it into the warrior's chest. Silence filled the arena. The last warrior collapsed. Daniel stood there, breathing heavily, blood dripping from his wounded arm. And then, the entire arena erupted. Some shouted in rage, refusing to believe a human had won. Others were stunned into silence. Valera stared at Daniel, something deep inside her stirring. The Emperor leaned forward, his golden eyes filled with new interest. Impressive. His voice echoed across the arena. But the trials are not over yet. Daniel wiped blood from his face. He had survived this round. But he knew the next challenge would be even worse. The arena was still echoing with the murmurs of disbelief. The human had won. Daniel stood with his chest rising and falling, his muscles aching, his wounds burning. He had defeated the 3 warriors, proving his strength, but he knew it wasn't over. Valera's heart was racing. She could see the concern in her father's golden eyes. The Emperor had underestimated Daniel, but he wasn't about to let a mere human claim victory so easily. With a slight motion of his hand, the Emperor signaled the final trial to begin. The crowd fell silent as heavy metal doors rumbled open on the far side of the arena. The ground trembled. Something enormous was stepping forward. Daniel tightened his grip on his stolen plasma sword. And then the monster appeared. It was a Zirin warlord, a being of legend. Standing over 10 feet tall, the warlord's body was covered in battle-scarred armor. His powerful arms carrying a massive energy axe that crackled with electricity. His face was hidden behind a fearsome war mask, but his piercing yellow eyes glowed with a deadly light. The crowd roared in excitement. Valera's hands clenched into fists. This was unfair. The Zirin warlords were the strongest warriors in the Empire, capable of taking on entire battalions alone. Even the 3 warriors Daniel had fought before would not have stood a chance against this monster. Daniel exhaled slowly. His body was already exhausted, but he had no choice. The warlord marched forward, raising his massive axe. "You are strong, human," he rumbled, his voice deep and full of confidence. "But now, you will die." The crowd chanted the warlord's name, eager to see the human crushed. Daniel didn't wait. He charged forward, moving fast, aiming low. His only chance was to use his speed. The warlord didn't even flinch. With a single, effortless swing of his axe, he sent a shockwave through the air. Daniel barely had time to react before the force slammed into him, throwing him across the arena. He hit the ground hard, rolling through the dirt. Pain exploded through his body. Valera's breath caught in her throat. No, But Daniel was already getting back up. The warlord tilted his head. Interesting, but futile. Daniel wiped the blood from his mouth. His legs felt like lead, but he had no choice. If he tried to fight head-on, he would lose. If he hesitated, he would die. He needed to think. Fast. His eyes darted around the arena, searching for anything he could use. His mind raced, analyzing every move the warlord had made so far. The axe was powerful but slow. The warlord relied on brute force. Maybe. Daniel suddenly sprinted forward again. The warlord laughed at the foolishness. With another massive swing, he brought his axe down, aiming to split the human in half. But this time, Daniel didn't dodge backward. He ran straight at the attack. At the last second, he rolled to the side, letting the axe slam into the ground. Crack! The arena floor shattered from the impact, but Daniel was already moving again. He used the force of his roll to spring upward, his stolen plasma sword flashing. The warlord barely had time to react before. Slash! Daniel's blade cut deep into the warlord's arm, slicing through armor and drawing blood. The warlord roared in fury. The crowd gasped. Velira covered her mouth in shock. He actually hurt the warlord. But the warlord was far from finished. With a sudden, explosive burst of movement, he backhanded Daniel across the chest. The impact sent him flying again, crashing against the ground with a painful thud. This time, he didn't get up immediately. The warlord rolled his injured shoulder, his glowing eyes locking onto the fallen human. Enough games. He raised his axe for the final blow. Velira couldn't stay silent anymore. She stood up, her voice cutting through the crowd. Stop. He has proven his strength. The emperor slowly turned his head toward his daughter. His expression hardened. This is the trial, Velira. If he cannot survive, he is not worthy. Her hands trembled. She knew her father was ruthless. But this was wrong. Daniel had fought harder than anyone. He had done what no other outsider had done before. She looked back at Daniel. He was struggling to move, his body covered in dust and blood. Yet, his eyes were still burning with determination. He was not giving up. Daniel gritted his teeth. I'm not done yet. His body screamed in pain, but he forced himself to push forward. As the warlord's axe came down, Daniel rolled again, barely dodging. But this time, he wasn't just avoiding, he was countering. Using every last ounce of his strength, he lunged forward, plunging his plasma sword straight into the warlord's knee joint. The warlord howled in pain, collapsing to one knee. Daniel ripped the blade free and slam. With the last of his strength, he drove his fist straight into the warlord's jaw. The giant warrior staggered backward, losing his balance. And then, he fell. The arena went silent. Daniel stood there, breathing hard, his entire body burning with exhaustion. He had done it. He had defeated the warlord. The crowd didn't know what to do. Half were in shock, half in outrage. The emperor leaned forward, his golden eyes unreadable. And then he spoke. You have passed the trials, human. The entire arena shook with the weight of those words. Velira's eyes widened. He actually did it. Daniel exhaled, his body finally giving in. As he collapsed to the ground, he saw one last thing before everything went black. Velira running toward him. Daniel woke up to the soft hum of a healing pod. His body felt light, as if he were floating in warm water. Pain lingered in his muscles, but it was dull, distant, almost forgotten. His mind was foggy, but as his vision cleared, he saw a figure standing beside the pod. Velira. Her deep violet eyes were fixed on him, a mixture of worry and something else, something he couldn't quite name. You're awake, she said softly. Daniel tried to move, but the pod's restraints kept him still. Did I win? A faint smile crossed her lips. You did more than that. You shocked the entire empire. Daniel had defeated the Zirin warlord, something no outsider had ever done. Even some of the emperor's greatest warriors had failed against such an opponent. Now, the entire empire was talking about him, but not everyone was pleased. Valera turned away, her voice troubled. "There is a problem." Daniel frowned. What kind of problem? Before she could answer, the door to the chamber slid open with a deep hiss. A tall, imposing figure entered, the emperor himself. His golden eyes studied Daniel carefully, like a predator sizing up an unusual prey. Daniel tensed. He had expected a reward, maybe recognition for passing the trials. But there was no approval in the emperor's gaze, only cold calculation. "You have done something impossible, human," the emperor said finally. "But strength alone is not enough." Daniel's hands clenched into fists. "What do you mean?" "I won. I survived. Isn't that proof enough?" The emperor's expression didn't change. "Many among my council believe you should not be allowed to claim your victory. They say an outsider, a mere human, has no right to stand among us." Valera's head snapped toward her father. "That's unfair. He passed every test." The emperor raised a hand, silencing her. "The council fears what you represent, human. They do not believe you deserve my daughter." Daniel stared at him. So that was it. This wasn't just about the trials. It was about tradition, politics, power. They didn't want an outsider to marry Valera. The emperor folded his arms. "Some demand your execution. Others want you banished." Daniel's jaw tightened. "And what do you want?" A long silence. Then, the emperor spoke in a measured tone. "I want to see if you are truly worthy." The next morning, Daniel was summoned to the royal council chamber. It was a vast hall of shimmering crystal, where the most powerful nobles and generals of the empire gathered. The moment he stepped inside, he felt the weight of their gazes. Some looked at him with curiosity, others with disgust. The emperor sat on his throne at the head of the room, his face unreadable. Valera stood beside him, her expression tense. A tall noble with dark red skin and piercing silver eyes stepped forward. "Human," he said in a sharp voice, "you are not one of us. You do not belong here." Daniel stood his ground. "Then tell me why I survived your trials. Tell me why I fought and won." A murmur ran through the council. The noble's lips curled in a sneer. Perhaps it was luck. Daniel let out a slow breath. "Luck didn't help me survive your warriors. Luck didn't help me outthink your warlord." He took a step forward, his voice firm. "If I don't belong, then why am I still standing?" Silence. Then, a deep chuckle broke the tension. The emperor's eyes gleamed with something almost like amusement. "Well said." The noble's face darkened. "You cannot be serious. This is an insult to our people." The emperor rose to his feet, his presence commanding instant silence. The trials were clear. This human has proven his strength. But if you doubt him, then let him prove himself once more. Daniel's stomach tightened. Another test. The emperor turned to him, his golden gaze piercing. "You wish to claim your victory, human. Then you must prove that you are more than just a fighter. You must prove you are worthy of leading." Daniel frowned. "And how do I do that?" The emperor's lips curled into the slightest hint of a smile. "By winning the hearts of my people." Daniel's next trial was unlike anything before. He was taken to the lower city, where the common people lived. Workers, merchants, families. For centuries, outsiders had been seen as weak. Many still whispered rumors about humans being nothing more than fragile creatures. Now, Daniel had to change that. Valera walked beside him, guiding him through the streets. "This is a test of leadership," she explained. "My father wants to see if you can earn respect without fighting." Daniel sighed. "Great, I barely survived the last trial, and now I have to win a popularity contest." Valera laughed softly, something like that. But as they walked through the city, Daniel noticed something. People were watching him, but not with hatred, with curiosity. The stories of his battles had already spread. Children whispered about the human who defeated a warlord. Merchants glanced at him, wondering if the rumors were true. And then something happened that surprised him. An old warrior stepped forward, his back straight despite his age. His battle-scarred face held no malice. He looked Daniel in the eyes, and after a long pause, he bowed. A ripple of shock spread through the crowd. Daniel froze. "Why are you bowing?" The old warrior's voice was rough but steady. "Because you have earned it." More whispers, more eyes watching. Valera's lips parted slightly, as if she couldn't believe what she was seeing. For the first time, a human had gained respect in an empire that had never accepted his kind. And it was only the beginning. Daniel had won the respect of the old warrior, but that was only the beginning. The emperor's challenge was not just about earning honor in battle. It was about proving that he could lead, that he could be part of their world. And that meant winning the hearts of the people. For the next few days, Daniel moved through the lower city alongside Valera. Everywhere they went, people watched him, some with curiosity, some with doubt, and some with open disapproval. Daniel could feel the weight of their judgment. He had expected it. After all, no outsider had ever been accepted in the empire, much less someone like him, a human. But he wasn't going to give up. He would prove them wrong. One evening, as Daniel and Valera walked through the marketplace, they heard angry voices up ahead. A group of armored guards was surrounding a merchant, their hands on their weapons. The merchant, an elderly woman with faded blue scales, knelt on the ground, her fruit stand overturned. Daniel rushed forward. "What's going on?" One of the guards sneered. "This merchant has failed to pay her dues to the noble houses. She will be punished." The woman's voice shook. "Please, I just need more time. My son is sick. I spent all my earnings on medicine." Daniel's hands clenched into fists. "She's just trying to take care of her family. There must be another way." The guards laughed. "Another way. The law is the law. No exceptions." Valera's expression darkened. "This is wrong. She should not be punished for helping her child." The guards hesitated. She was the princess, after all. But then one of them scoffed. "You're soft, princess. The law cannot be changed for one woman." Daniel stepped forward. "Then maybe the law is wrong." A hush fell over the marketplace. The guards stared at him. The gathered crowd whispered among themselves. A human daring to challenge their system. Daniel reached into his pocket and pulled out a small bag of credits, his reward from the trial. He tossed it at the guard's feet. "Take it. Consider her debt paid." The lead guard glared at him. "This is not your concern, human." Daniel didn't back down. "It is now." For a long moment, no one spoke. Then, with a frustrated grunt, the guards picked up the bag and walked away. The merchant woman looked up at Daniel, her eyes filled with gratitude. "Why? Why would you help me?" she whispered. Daniel smiled. "Because it was the right thing to do." She lowered her head in respect. "Thank you, human." And for the first time, the crowd wasn't just watching him. They were nodding in approval. Back at the palace, the emperor was waiting. Daniel and Valera entered the grand hall, where the royal council had gathered once again. The emperor's golden eyes studied Daniel carefully. "You interfered with the laws of my empire today." Daniel held his ground. "Yes, because those laws aren't always fair." A few of the nobles muttered in outrage, but the emperor simply tilted his head. "You challenged centuries of tradition." Daniel nodded. "Maybe some traditions need to change." The emperor was silent for a long time. Then he let out a low chuckle. "You are bold, human." Valera stepped forward. "Father, he has done what no outsider ever could." The people are starting to listen to him. The emperor's gaze shifted between his daughter and Daniel. Finally, he spoke. "Very well. There is one final test." Daniel stiffened. "Another test." The emperor smiled. "If you truly wish to stand by my daughter's side, then prove your worth not just to me, but to the entire empire." That night, As Daniel and Valera stood on the balcony overlooking the city, the air was filled with tension. Daniel sighed. Another test. Of course. Valera's expression was unreadable. This one will be the hardest. He turned to her. What is it? She hesitated before speaking. You must stand before the entire empire and make your case. You must convince them that a human deserves to be among us. Daniel felt his stomach drop. A speech, a public challenge. Fighting was one thing. Convincing an entire alien civilization to accept him, that was something else entirely. Valera touched his arm gently. I believe in you, Daniel. He looked into her deep violet eyes. She meant it. She believed in him. And that was enough. He took a deep breath and nodded. Then I won't let you down. Daniel stood before the Grand Royal Arena, where thousands of aliens had gathered. The massive structure, carved from black stone, stretched toward the sky, filled with the echoes of voices whispering, questioning, and judging. Today was the day he would face his final challenge. The Emperor sat on his golden throne at the highest platform, his expression unreadable. Valera stood beside him, her hands clenched in nervous anticipation. Daniel took a deep breath. This wasn't about proving his strength anymore. This was about proving his place. A royal announcer stepped forward. His voice rang across the arena. Human outsider, you stand here today to claim a right no one of your kind has ever dared to seek. The right to be one of us. The crowd murmured. Some still doubted him. Others watched with cautious interest. The announcer continued. To prove your worth, you must face the voice of the people. Speak, and let them decide if you are worthy. Daniel exhaled slowly. A speech. He had faced warriors, survived deadly trials, and even earned the Emperor's interest. But now he had to convince an entire alien civilization to accept him. He stepped forward, his voice strong. I know many of you don't trust me. I know you see me as an outsider, a stranger who does not belong in your empire. Asterisk, asterisk. There were nods from the crowd, whispers of agreement. But I have seen your people. I have fought beside them. I have felt your struggles, your hopes, your fears, and I have come to admire your strength. Silence settled over the arena. I know I am different. I know I am not one of you by blood. But being part of a people is not just about blood. It's about choice. It's about what you stand for. He turned toward the Emperor. And I stand for Valera. Gasps echoed through the crowd. Valera's eyes widened. Daniel continued. She has been cast aside because she was different. But I see her for who she truly is, not weak, but strong. Not broken, but unbreakable. The whispers grew louder. Some eyes softened. Daniel clenched his fists. You call me an outsider, but I ask you, what truly makes someone one of your own? Is it birth? Or is it loyalty? Is it honor? Is it the willingness to fight for those you love? The murmurs grew into shouts, some in favor, others against. The Emperor raised a hand, and silence fell. He studied Daniel for a long moment. Then he turned to his council. Let the people decide. A long pause followed. Then the votes began. At first, it seemed as though the answer was no. Many in the noble class frowned, shaking their heads. But then, the warriors Daniel had fought alongside raised their voices in support. The merchants, the common people, those who had seen his kindness, began nodding. And then, to everyone's shock, the old warrior who had once doubted him stepped forward. The human has honor, he said, his deep voice cutting through the silence. More than many among us. One by one, others joined. Until finally, the Emperor stood. The people have spoken, he declared, and so has my daughter. He turned to Valera. Do you still wish to stand by this human? Valera didn't hesitate. Yes. A slow smile spread across the Emperor's face. Then so be it. The crowd erupted into a mix of cheers and disbelief. Daniel had done it. Later that night, As he and Valera stood on the palace balcony, looking over the glowing city below, she turned to him. "You changed everything today." He chuckled. "I guess I did." She smiled softly. "You are no longer an outsider." Daniel glanced at her, his heart steady. "And you are no longer alone." She reached for his hand. He held it firmly. They had both been unwanted once. But now, they belonged. Together. The end.